Nobody wants to drive across a bridge that's designed by a relativistic engineer. They don't want someone that says, this answer feels right, or this answer sounds right, or this answer helps right historical wrongs in some imaginary way. What they want is truth. They want someone who has done the math and who has got to the truth, the correct answer. This structure will support the necessary amount of weight. You can't build buildings, homes, bridges based on your feelings. You have to do it based on the truth. And everybody understands this. Now, for whatever reason, we have this idea today that society, however, can be built on feel-good narratives, nonsense stories, whatever sounds right, whatever ideas are popular, and there's no desire to search for truth. Now, it's not to say there is no desire. There are people out there that still want to get to the truth. There is a poor way to run a society, and there is a better way. The best tool we have for determining truth and falsehood is logic. And one of the ways we can do this is if someone offers up a conclusion, we can go through their premises step by step and debate them point by point. And another way to do this is to look for a contradiction in their reasoning, and that allows you to reject their conclusion. And I've never seen a more twisted labyrinth of illogic than what passes for leftist progressive thinking today. Let's take a very simple example here in Seattle. January 1st, 2020, they are no longer allowing unvaccinated children back into school. They can't come to public school. Doesn't matter whether you have a religious objection or health concerns, you are not allowed in the school. Well, let's think about this. I have had the chickenpox when I was a child. I am now immune to the chickenpox. I don't care how many people you put me around that have chickenpox, I'm not going to get the chickenpox. You can put me in a whole institution full of people with this disease and I won't get it. Now, allegedly, this is what these vaccinations do. They make the children immune to the disease. So, you have one child who doesn't have their immunization, and you have 1,000 kids who do. What difference does it make if that one kid isn't immunized? Now, there's also this idea that they are intrinsically safe. Of course, you got to look suspiciously at the fact that you can't sue these companies if something does go wrong. That's very interesting. And if you ask your average leftist, hey, what do you think of the pharmaceutical industry? They'd say, oh, it's terrible. If you say, what do you think about this law requiring everyone get vaccinated? Oh, it's wonderful. The other thing you have is genetic differences. Take a product as simple as alcohol. I'm of Northern European descent. I can drink a couple of beers and have no problem. Someone of Native American descent can have the exact same product, and because of their biology, have a very different reaction. And in fact, you can look all over the world. People have different biological responses to alcohol. Why would any other substance, outside substance, be any different? Even within populations, you have different responses. I might be fine, but someone with the same genetic background that maybe has alcoholism in their family history, it would be a whole different problem. But the leftists, they insist that these children must be vaccinated, and it seems to be more just signaling to, I don't know, it feels like they all want to appear on Stephen Colbert and get a round of applause these days. Like, it's just, the idea is you're spitting in a conservative's face. Not that their policies make any sense. It's like if a conservative approves of a certain idea or holds a certain set of beliefs, the leftist just naturally has to disagree with it. It's false to them based on the source it came from. They just don't want to examine the idea at all. It's just rejected and opposed out of hand. But this reflexive rejection of any idea coming from a conservative leads to some pretty irrational actions. What about this corona bug here? This global pandemic, apparently. All of the candidates on the Democratic stage stood up and said they would open the borders and they would provide free healthcare, free in quotes, to anyone that can get into this country, legally or not. Well, what's the issue with being undocumented? Well, we don't know their criminal history. We don't know their medical history. We don't know their country of origin. We don't know anything about them. Now, my question to these people in Seattle passing this law, Seattle's a sanctuary city. Are you going to kick little Pablo out of class because you don't know if he has his vaccinations or not? What are you going to do? How are you supposed to stop a global pandemic? You know, the corona bug doesn't seem that bad. It seems to be worse for the elderly and sickly. But what if the next one is worse? You're going to abolish ICE and border control? And like Bernie Sanders said, he's going to make crossing the border something like jaywalking, which is very rarely enforced. So basically, we have de facto open borders. People can come from anywhere in the world as long as they cross the border from Mexico. How are you going to stop a global pandemic? If the left is so terrified of one child who doesn't have his measles vaccine, what about millions of people streaming across from anywhere with any disease, with no vaccinations whatsoever? And if you're going to pay, or if you're going to give these free medical care to whoever can make it, first of all, that's a massive incentive. So you're only going to encourage people to come in here by the millions. And then second of all, somebody's got to pay. Like, all of this does cost money. Is it going to be the millionaires and billionaires? It's not very likely. They're pretty good at avoiding the taxes that we tried to levy on them. I mean, when the income tax started out, it was supposed to be only the top 2% of income earners paying it. Now, we all have to pay it every year, but for whatever reason, the top 1% and 2% are excellent at getting out of it. You do charitable donations or market losses, or you can offset a lot of earnings, and they can pay very little in taxes, and the rest of us are forking over a good 30% of our income. And that helps keep you poor. That's just another way it helps keep you poor. And so this burden will be carried by the middle class. And all it's going to do is impoverish us all. There will be supply shortages at some point. We can't take care of the world. We don't have enough doctors and nurses for our own population. And I can't help but wonder if this outbreak spells the end of the argument for open borders, at least among the everyday people. Will the fear of global pandemic finally jolt them back into common sense and override this seemingly bottomless and self-destructive altruism? Well, what do our overlords have planned for us? Here we have an article, again by Paul Joseph Watson, where the EU officials refuse to implement border controls to stop coronabug. So even as we have this global pandemic, EU officials have refused to implement border controls, insisting the sanctity of open borders is more important. The number of cases in Italy has soared from 3 to 322 in 5 days, with 10 deaths. But authorities insist that the Schengen area, which abolishes passport checks and border controls between 26 European states, must not be compromised. How are you supposed to quarantine any sort of pandemic? Despite the fact that 50,000 citizens in Lombardy and Veneto are under internal lockdown, no measures have been proposed for national borders. Italian Prime Minister, Mr. Conte, has refused to implement border controls, claiming it wouldn't help stop the containment of the virus. That's not true. A child could see that. It's untruth. He's lying right to your face. Preventing populations from moving around would indeed contain the spread. There's no logic behind what a prime minister says. It's completely irrational. Health Minister Roberto Speranza told reporters in Rome on Tuesday, "We agreed to keep borders open. Closing borders would be a disproportionate and ineffective measure at this time." Well, then how does a quarantine work, man? As RT highlights, borders will remain open despite Italy now being a major source of the bug spreading into neighboring European countries. It's almost like they don't care. It's almost like the leaders of the countries in the West, they don't care. They don't care about their population. They care about an agenda. The French Transport Minister, Jean-Baptiste Djebari, has also refused to close the border between France and Italy, and Germany has likewise refused to do so. And Paul Joseph Watson asked the question, at what point does stopping a dangerous and disruptive global pandemic become more important than the sacred, never-to-be-questioned or curtailed international flow of people? Numerous nearby countries have closed their border with China, yet infected Chinese citizens are still flowing into the West. The World Health Organization, whose job is supposedly to stop a global pandemic, has repeatedly insisted that preventing stigmatization and keeping borders open is critical, to the point where they seem more concerned about that rather than actually stopping the pandemic. So if the World Health Organization doesn't actually exist to improve, say, world health, and instead has some ulterior agenda, I wonder if an institution like the IPCC is actually concerned about climate change. You know, it's almost like these institutions have some unstated goal. It's almost like there's some shadowy internationalist group of wealthy individuals whose ultimate goal is to do nothing more than tear down the nation state and replace it with a new world global order.